PTSD nearly took his life. But then a shelter dog saved him. They say the war ends when you come home. But for Jake, that's when his real battle began. He came back from his find but a duffel bag, a discharged weapon, and a mind full of ghosts. At 32 years old, he looked fine from the outside, just another veteran back in civilian life. But on the inside, something was unraveling. Quietly, brutally. The nightmares were relentless. Every night the same sounds, gunfire, screaming, explosions. And then silence. The kind of silence that presses against your chest until you can't breathe. He'd wake up sweating, heart racing, fists clenched, convinced he was still in the middle of it all. His days weren't much better. The smallest noise could send him into panic. A slammed door. A car backfiring. Even laughter, sometimes, because it reminded him of who wasn't laughing anymore. He didn't talk about it. Not to his sister. Not to the VA counselor. Not even to himself. The only emotion he could feel was guilt. Guilt for the friends who didn't make it back. Guilt for being alive when they weren't. Guilt for not doing more. For not being enough. Slowly, Jake stopped answering calls. Then texts. Then the door. Days went by where he barely moved. He ate whatever was cheap and fast. He drank whatever was strong. And the walls of his tiny apartment felt more like a coffin with every passing week. One night he took out a photo, him and two of his closest brothers in arms. They were laughing, arms slung around each other, their uniforms dusty but their eyes full of life. That was before the blast. Before everything fell apart. Jake stared at the photo for a long time. Then he picked up a pen. He wrote a short note. Just a few lines. Something for his sister to find. Something to explain what he couldn't say out loud. Then he reached for the gun. His hand trembled as he loaded it. There was no drama. No speech. Just the cold metal in his palm and the unbearable weight in his chest. And then, something happened. A bark. It was sharp, loud, unexpected. It came from outside, probably a neighbor's dog. But it cut through the silence like a lightning bolt. For some reason, Jake froze. Another bark. Louder this time. Then a growl. It made no sense, but that noise pulled him back. Just enough. Just enough to notice the weapon in his hand. Just enough to feel something, confusion, annoyance, something other than despair. He put the gun down. And then he broke. He dropped to the floor, his whole body shaking. The sobs came hard and fast. Ugly, desperate sobs. The kind that scrape your insides raw. The kind you can't control. The kind that only come when you're right at the edge and still choose to stay. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds. He hadn't seen daylight in what felt like weeks. He stood slowly, his body sore, his mouth dry. For reasons he couldn't explain, he remembered the bark. Later that day, he left the apartment. He didn't plan on doing anything special. Just needed air. Just needed something. He ended up at a veterans support group. He sat in the back, quiet, listening. One woman talked about her service dog, a mutt that could sense her anxiety before she even realized it. Another man said his Labrador once stopped him from stepping in front of a train. Jake listened with folded arms and an expression that said, "I don't believe in magic." But something about their story stuck. On the way out, he picked up a pamphlet from a side table. The cover showed a German shepherd, proud and strong. It read, "Healing Paws, Shelter Dogs for Veterans." Jake stared at it. That night, he didn't touch the gun. Didn't even open the case. The next day, he walked into a local animal shelter. Told himself he was just looking. Just curious. The place was loud. Dogs barking, paws scratching, tails thumping. Chaos in every direction. But then he saw him. In a kennel at the very back, sitting still while every other dog barked like mad. A German shepherd. Scarred. Quiet. His name was Max. He didn't bark. Didn't wag his tail. Just looked at Jake, calm and steady, as if he already understood. Jake stood there, frozen. Something about the dog's eyes. They weren't pleading. They weren't afraid. They were familiar. Like they belonged to someone who'd seen too much, lost too much, and was still here anyway. Jake knelt down. The dog didn't move. Then, slowly, Max walked to the front of the kennel and sat. They stared at each other through the bars. And Jake felt something crack inside him. Not in a bad way. In a necessary way. Like the first crack in a wall that needs to come down. He whispered, almost too quietly to hear himself. "Can I meet him?" And just like that, something began to shift. He didn't know it yet. But this dog, this broken, quiet, watchful soul, was about to save his life. Max didn't trust easily. Jake could tell from the start. He didn't jump or lick or whine like the other dogs. When Jake first took him home, Max stepped into the apartment with slow, careful steps, sniffing everything, pausing at every corner like he expected something to go wrong. Jake understood. He moved the same way. The first night, Jake tried to sleep while Max curled up near the door, not next to the bed, not even in the same room. Just close enough to listen. Not close enough to believe he was safe. They were both testing the waters. Both half broken, half afraid, and completely unsure of each other. But there was something about the quiet between them that felt oddly comforting. Jake didn't talk much, but he found himself thinking out loud with Max in the room. Saying things like, "Morning," or "You hungry?" or "I don't know how to do this." And Max would just look at him, head tilted, ears perked, like he was listening. The silence in the apartment didn't feel like a trap anymore. It started to feel like peace. They built a routine. Every morning at 7:15, Max would sit beside Jake's bed and wait. Not bark. Not whine. Just sit. And Jake, for the first time in months, had a reason to get up. They walked. At first just around the block. Then to the park. Then longer stretches. Jake still flinched when a car backfired. Still froze when he heard kids shouting too loudly. But Max stayed close, always watching. Like a bodyguard. Like a friend. One afternoon, it happened. Jake was walking Max near a busy intersection when fireworks suddenly cracked in the sky. Some kid's backyard celebration. Everything hit at once. Jake's chest tightened. His ears rang. The world tilted. He felt like he was back in the desert. He dropped to the grass, hands trembling, heart racing. He couldn't breathe. But Max didn't panic. He walked over. Pressed his head into Jake's chest. From grounding. Like an anchor in a storm. Jake gripped the dog's fur and held on. And slowly, the world returned. It wasn't magic. It didn't fix everything. But it was the first time Jake had survived a trigger without spiraling into oblivion. He sat there for a long time, holding Max, tears silently sliding down his face, while the dog simply stayed. No judgment. No questions. Just presence. That night, Jake wrote a journal entry for the first time since his deployment. One sentence. He stayed. Max did more than just stay. He began to sense the shifts in Jake, before even Jake noticed them. When the nightmares came, Max would wake him up gently with a paw to the chest or a cold nose to the cheek. When Jake's mind started to drift into dark places during the day, Max would nudge his arm or drop a toy at his feet like a quiet invitation to come back to the moment. And somehow it worked. Jake started cooking again. Just simple meals, but meals made on purpose. He called his sister. They didn't talk about anything deep, but he didn't hang up, and that was progress. He found a part-time job at a local hardware store. It didn't pay much, but it got him out of the house. Max waited by the door every evening until Jake returned. And Jake started laughing again. Not a lot. Not loudly. But once, while watching Max chase his own tail in dizzy circles, he laughed so hard he had to sit down. It felt foreign. Strange. Beautiful. It scared him a little, to feel good again. Like the world might punish him for forgetting to suffer. But Max didn't let the good moments go to waste. He celebrated them with tail wags and head nudges and eyes that said, "See? I told you there was more." One day at the dog park, a woman approached Jake. She'd seen Max sticking to his side like glue and asked if he was a service dog. Jake opened his mouth to say no, but stopped. Because maybe he was. Not certified, not trained, not official. But Max was serving. Every single day. Not as a soldier, but as a lifeline. Jake walked home with Max trotting beside him, leash loose, steps light. For the first time in years, Jake didn't feel like a shell of a man. He felt alive. Not healed. Not whole. But alive. And that was more than he ever thought he'd be again. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It's slow. Uneven. Like trying to rebuild a house with bare hands, while the wind keeps trying to knock the pieces down again. But Jake was rebuilding, whether he knew it or not. Every day with Max brought something back that Jake thought he'd lost forever: hope. In quiet moments. In small gestures. In the way Max leaned into him when his hands started shaking. In the way he stared up at Jake during walks as if to say, "We're doing this. One step at a time." Jake started making plans. Not big ones. Not life goals or 5-year dreams. Saturday. Groceries. Laundry. A trip to the park. And then Sunday. A call to his sister. A dog bath. A meal that wasn't microwaved. One night, Jake walked into his old room, where the nightmares used to live, and found Max already lying on the bed, tail thumping lazily. He didn't even hesitate. He got in beside him. They both slept through the night. It had been 9 months since that happened. At the VA, they noticed the change. His posture was different. He looked more. He smiled once, and the nurse had to look twice to make sure she saw it right. But healing isn't a straight line. And sometimes, it's the smallest things that knock you back down. It started with a letter. A denial from the Veterans Affairs office. Some paperwork issue. A delay in his disability compensation. Then his car broke down on the same day. Then a manager at work yelled at him in front of a customer. Something small. Something stupid. But it triggered something big. Jake felt it rising again, that heavy fog. The static in his chest. The urge to disappear. He went home. Slammed the door. Sat in the dark. Max came over, tail wagging softly, like he could sense it all before it even landed. But Jake was too far gone. He snapped. "Not now, Max. Just go." Max paused, then sat anyway. Jake shouted. "I said go." Max flinched, just barely, but then stood and walked slowly to the hallway. The door frame swallowed him whole. Jake sat there, head in his hands, guilt already crashing over him like a wave. The apartment was silent again. But this time, it wasn't comforting. It was crushing. He stayed like that for hours. The note he'd once written drifted back into his mind. He hadn't thought about it in weeks. Maybe months. He hated that it still lived in there. When he finally stood, the first thing he did was look for Max. He found him curled up by the front door, eyes open, ears alert, but not looking at Jake. Max didn't sulk. He didn't pout. But he was waiting. Quietly. Like always. Jake knelt down beside him and whispered through clenched teeth. "I'm sorry." Max looked up. And in that look, no blame. No resentment. Just presence. Like he'd never really left. Like he never would. Jake broke down. He didn't cry the way he used to, quiet, hidden, ashamed. He cried openly. Right there on the floor, arms wrapped around a 75-pound German shepherd who had become his anchor